And he asked his teachers and professors and doctors and said, what am I going to do? And they said, well, just read up. It's incurable. By the time you're 55, you'll feel better. But I'm 25. I can't live this way. I don't want to live. So the doctors would tell him, well, learn how to deal with it. He said, no, I can't do that. And he set out to see what he could do to find help for himself. And he searched for a long time. And he went to other doctors and teachers and professors and universities, and he subscribed to all kinds of medical journals and even foreign ones. He had them translated and things like that. And it took a long time. But one day he ran across an article in a little obscure foreign journal where a woman was describing, or the doctor was describing a patient, this woman, who had migraine headaches and changed her diet. Diet? You never heard anything about diet in medical school. This was before World War I. Diet? Never heard anything about diet. But he thought, well, I've searched and searched, I might as well try it. He finally figured out that our physical ancestors, we've got to be careful here because we don't want to step on religious toes, they use vegetarian foods. So he decided to try that. And since he lived in Germany, apples were always available. So he started with nothing but apples. And when he ate fresh apples, raw apples, grated apples, applesauce, and things like that, and drank apple juice, he was free of migraines. And then he slowly started to add things after another, one after another, and he found that if he added something that his body couldn't handle, he could have a migraine in 20 minutes. But as long as he stayed with the vegetarian foods, he was fine. He started also to eat cooked foods, and he had a problem because with cooked foods, people would add salt. And he found out that he couldn't handle salt, that it caused him a new outbreak of migraines. And so on, little by little, he developed what he called his migraine diet. He was still thinking the medical way as he had been taught. For each disease, there's a cure or a treatment, okay? So he thought that when he was using one thing that would cure his migraines, that would be helpful and curative for other people's migraines. Never thought of any other disease. So when he settled down to his own practice in a city where I was eventually born by the name of Bielefeld in Westphalia, northwest Germany, he treated people who came to him with migraine headaches and said, look, migraines are supposedly incurable. I had migraines, I'm doing this. Why don't you try it? He never promised them a cure or anything. But he said, it helped me, why don't you try it? And invariably, these patients would come back and say, yes, doctor, as long as I do what you tell me, I'm free of migraines. If I cheat, I have a migraine. Okay, so he was convinced that this was a good migraine therapy until one day a patient comes back to him, had been complaining of migraines, and said, yes, Dr. Gerson, but I had a different problem also. And that was skin tuberculosis. And it's called lupus vulgaris. It's not the regular, what we now call lupus. Lupus vulgaris, skin tuberculosis. And he said that too is healing. So my father said, no, that's impossible. It's an incurable disease. It must have been something else. No, the guy pulled out a laboratory test that those lesions, wherever they were, had tubercular bacilli in them. My father said, let me see that. He had no idea. He couldn't figure out the connection between migraine headaches and skin tuberculosis. But he saw that, yes, there was curative. It was healing. So he said, look, my shingle reads internal and nerve diseases. I don't see skin problems. Do you know others who have the problem? It's relatively rare. Sure, he said, where was in the hospital? Well, my father said, look, send me some of those patients. I'll treat them free of charge. I just want to know. He was a true experimenter and healer. When he saw something valuable, he wanted to use it also for others. So he started to treat skin tuberculosis, and sure enough, it healed. This came to the ears of the tuberculosis specialist Sauerbruck in southern Germany, in Munich. And he was treating lung tuberculosis. He was quite famous worldwide. And he was a big professor. And he wanted to see Gerson. Gerson was just a little town doctor, you know. So he actually asked Gerson to come. Those days you didn't fly. This was in the early 20s. It was an 8-hour train ride. Okay, so my father went there and they discussed it, and Sauerbruck said, okay, I'll run a test. I'll take some of the most seriously ill lupus patients, lupus vulgaris, skin tuberculosis, and if only one of them can be arrested, he wasn't even talking any further, only one of them can be arrested, I'll believe everything you say. So he took 450 advanced skin tuberculosis patients and fed them the Gerson food, the Gerson therapy. 446 recovered. Didn't just get improvement or stop, recovered. So he published this. He was the big professor. My father's name was sort of on the bottom. Anyway, my father didn't care. He didn't want glory, but he figured if skin tuberculosis can be healed with this migraine diet, why not other forms of TB? And a lot of young people had the so-called galloping tuberculosis and were dying. People, kids between the ages of 18 and 22, there was a lot of death. And so my father started to treat some of those. And sure enough, they too recovered. And he was called to Berlin, to the big, hospital and so on. He only accepted patients that were certified uninfluenceable, because he was always told, oh, well, they're early cases, they would have healed anyway. Not true, but the doctors always thought of excuses, okay? So he only took cases that were certified incurable. And sure enough, they got well, but that is the time when he found out that these patients often had other problems. Some had arthritis, some had asthma, some had allergies, some had high blood pressure, some had kidney problems, and so on. And all these problems disappeared along with the lung tuberculosis. And that's when he realized that he was no longer treating a disease. He was helping all the body's systems to reactivate their healing mechanisms so that everything was healing. That's when he really parted company with orthodox medicine. And of course started to heal chronic diseases. You name it, it's curable. Orthodox medicine claims that chronic degenerative disease is incurable by definition. We have been curing it in Mexico with the Gerson therapy for 35, 40 years now. And he cured it for 35, 40 years in New York in his practice. Well, it's interesting. The more famous people, they want to have the fanciest clinics and the fanciest doctors and the best and so on. And generally, they don't come for the Gerson therapy, a little Mexican clinic that's hiding, stuff like that. So we rarely see really famous people. We did have some. Dr. Gerson had some. The famous, way back, I remember when I was a teenager, the famous Russian bass, I think, Fyodor Shalyapin. And there was a famous violinist. And there was a famous actress. But generally, very few people, because the rich and the famous didn't go to, you know, these little side situations. They wanted the best, the most famous, and the most expensive doctors. Jay Cordis, the famous juice man with the bushy eyebrows, did a very good job by promoting his juice machine. It's vastly superior to anything kids might be drinking, like sodas or the sugared juice drinks and things like that. It's vastly superior, and it does contain nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and it's very valuable because it was spread all over the United States, and the public became very much aware of the importance of juicing. Jay himself was apparently a patient of my father's when my father was practicing in New York. Jay had, at the time, he had bladder cancer. He was in his middle 20s. He was young married, he had a young wife, and I think already 1 or 2 children, and he was distraught, and he had no money. And, you know, my father really wasn't interested in money. If people had no money, he didn't care. He had a patient who was nervous, and he said, my father noticed he was nervous. He said, what's the matter? He says, I don't have enough money to get back home. He needed to get back home with his wife to Ohio, where he left from New York. So my father gave him money. He didn't care. He would give patients money and not collect. He didn't care at all. He didn't care for money. He wanted the knowledge, the experience, the healing. He wanted to see people get well. He was a true healer and a scientist. He worked on the background. He wanted to know what's causing it and so on. And he found out.